Welcome to this week's Eccentric Minute, brought to you by Eccentric. This week's Eccentric Minute, we're going to review one of our foundational single leg exercises, and that is the K-box split squat. Just like with the squat, guys, make sure you got that tether taut when you're at full extension, and set yourself a counterbalance. Here we're going to use the barbell on the rack. Sink it down just like a regular split squat, chest tall, and drive through that front foot. I really like that back plate there to take tension off that back toe. As we progress forward, that's going to be big time to help us even keep our weight forward more. As we increase intensity and decrease volume, we're also typically cutting depth, therefore increasing transfer when we're looking at stopping power at a greater height. Guys, give this one a shot. I'm sure that this is one that you're going to find some great carryover for your athletes. I really hope you enjoyed this week's Eccentric Minute. Make sure you check them out at eccentric.com to find out everything you need about the K-box and the K-pulley. Being a strength and conditioning professional requires constant pursuit of better knowledge, better methods, and better means. But what if there was a place where strength and conditioning coaches could learn from some of the most innovative practitioners in the world, such as Jeff Moyer, Lachlan Wilmot, William Wayland, James the Thinker Smith, and Keir Wenham-Flatt? Well, you could find multiple lectures from each of these top-level coaches and a few lectures and examples from yours truly as well, all in the Strength Coach Network. The Strength Coach Network is going to bring you well over 100 different lectures from some of the top practitioners in the world to be your one-stop shop for your continuing education and professional development. So hop on over to strengthcoachnetwork.com/CVASP today and get your 48-hour trial for only $1. That's strengthcoachnetwork.com/CVASPS to get your 48-hour trial for only $1. I look forward to seeing you in the Strength Coach Network. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, I have the absolute pleasure of getting to sit down and discuss the role of variability in the training programs with athletes with Dana Agar-Newman. Guys, after a real quick intro, Dana's going to dive right into what drove him to look at the role of variability in training, including where are some instances that it could be leading to more harm than good. And this is going to include how they evaluated the athletes to make sure that there was consistent progress and how this led into their idea of like gas pedal, brake pedal in order to make sure that everything was moving forward when they were trying to develop these athletes. He then starts talking about how this transferred from the world of rugby into the divers and how this will impact their taper to really build confidence with the young people he gets to work with. And then we run down the rabbit hole of the idea of holding some tools back, right? So we're not throwing everything at them at once so that you have the ability to improve on things later. And we kind of eliminate those ideas of these like kind of stuck plateaus that athletes get into. Guys, we finish off talking about this whole idea of where the 4-week block came from and why maybe it's not the best thing for athletes and why this idea of long-term planning may not be in our best interest either. This is really an awesome talk, guys. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Let's get right to it. Dana, thank you so much for spending the time with us today.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, man, I'm excited for this. We were just talking a little bit off camera, and I think that this is something that it actually is probably going to end up being a My Thoughts Monday rant about the same time this comes out too, because I have questions too to roll with what we were talking about. But let's let people know who you are, where you're at, and how you got there.
So I'm Dana Agar-Newman. I'm the lead strength conditioning coach out at the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific. How I got here is my original plan was to be a high school teacher and coach track and field. And I came out to Victoria to take a volunteer coaching gig, saw there's an internship available, and so I was coaching track and field and interning as a strength and conditioning coach. And then it got to a point where, strength conditioning started making money doing it, and I realized I was getting the same enjoyment, and I was getting paid a hell of a lot more than an S&C or athletics coach. So I made the switch full-time to S&C. So the first sports really that I got working in was rugby 15s, men's team leading up to the World Cup. The first thing I was told when I got a paying job was the guys get faster, you have a job. The guys don't get faster, you don't have a job. Which, we probably wouldn't say to a beginner anymore because HR would probably rip our heads off. But it was actually great for me to hear that because, you realize that those athletes have one shot. You got to do all you can to make them better. So yeah, I started off as an intern at the Canadian Sport Institute. Had some great mentors, Tyler Goodall, Matt Barr, and I just went from an intern to a strength conditioning coach, and now I'm the lead of the department. So I've been here since 2010, and Victoria is a pretty special place if you've ever been out here. Also big hunter, so 45 minutes from work, I can be out hunting bears and deer and anything else. So it's pretty good.
That's awesome, brother, and it's a cool story to hear how you got out there. And now with the athletes that you're doing, there's some cool, interesting, novel might not be the right word, but I guess that's all I can pop in my head right now. Ways that you're handling these athletes.
Yeah, totally. I'd say probably the right word is it's an adaptation of a system that's been around for a number of years. And it's a system that I've kind of, started applying to athletes based on necessity. So if you're familiar with track and field, there's a world-renowned throws coach, Anatoly Bondarchuk. He's based in BC now, which isn't up in Kamloops, which is not too far from where I'm based. There's guys like Derek Evely who I can contact as a resource. So I got familiar with this system, and I had a chance to apply an adaptation of it to some rugby athletes, and had great success. And these were chronically injured athletes that out of necessity I had to try something different with them, and they responded to it, and it really opened up my eyes to the power of variability in training, and also the lack of variability in training, and how important consistency and small doses of things all the time is to athletes.
Yeah, dude, and I love that because obviously, being a guy who studied under Yessis and having a connection with Dr. B, I understand exactly what you're talking about. But let's talk about these two athletes. Let's talk about what they were dealing with that brought you to this point, and then why you decided that this was going to end out being the direction you took.
Yeah, so these two athletes specifically, they were chronically injured, and in rugby sevens, it's a game where there's a high running volume, there's a lot of physical contact, but these weren't acute injuries. These were chronic injuries like shin splints, and one of these athletes was speed power machine. Her mom was actually in Ben Johnston's training group back in the day, so it gives you an idea. She was a purebred sprinter. I think she cleans over 100 kilos now. Triple broad jumps, 850. So it's not bad. And this was when she was like out of high school. So she's a pretty powerful girl. And these athletes just were never healthy. And so I had to take a different approach with them. So what I decided was, okay, well, we're going to do small doses all the time. And what we decided on is a 3-day rotation around the rugby schedule, where they come in and they do a control test, which in this case was a counter movement jump. If I got the green light on that, and it was really complex, I just took a rolling average from the previous block of training. If they're jumping above that, we'd start a 3-day cycle. They do a speed session followed by a strength session. Day 2 was a conditioning session. Day 3 was either a speed or a speed endurance session, and then followed by another strength session, then a day off. Come in, take the control test, said they were good to go. We start that 3-day rotation again. And we just keep rolling that 3-day rotation over and over again until they were no longer adapting. And when they were no longer adapting, we'd offload them, give them a little break, and then change up the exercises, and they'd start training again. And they were responding to it, and it was good because the exercises we chose, I should say, were all measurable for the most part, and they could see themselves improving, which increased their buy-in. And so it was actually quite interesting. The one girl was a bubble player, and she ended up making the squad that won an Olympic medal. After that season, we debriefed it, and we said, you've been healthy now for 6 months. Do you want to change your training up and join the rest of the team for what I'd consider general training? And, they thought about it for a little bit, and they said, no, we want to keep doing this. And, bear in mind, these athletes were training for 28 days in a row at one point. And as a coach, I was kind of hoping they'd want to join the rest of the team because I hadn't had a day off either. But you know what? It just opened my eyes to the power of variability, and also the power of um, minimizing the amount of variables in your training program, because the more complex you make it, the harder it is to see what's going on. And I was a pole vault coach, and I use the analogy, it's like pole vault standards. If you are moving your pole vault standards around all the time, you're adjusting a variable to the athlete's jump, which is another variable, which is going to lead to an even more variable outcome. So if you can minimize the amount of variables in your training program, it's easier to see what is working and what's not working.
100%. So then now, moving forward, how is this going to impact what you're doing with the rest of the squad?
Yeah, so after the Olympics, I switched sports, and one of the sports I moved to was diving. And I've got one of the athletes had been at the institute for 7 years, and um, when I started working with her, same thing, she was injured. And it's actually kind of neat because I worked with her years before I started working with rugby, and so it's kind of cool to now be working with her at the tail end of her career when she's trying to make this Olympics in Tokyo. And we've implemented this approach now and been running it for a couple of years. And it's the same thing where you just keep your program standard. You be very careful with the variability in your programs, and you wait for that athlete to respond to the training program. You look what exercises are working for that athlete, and when you change your program, you keep track of those exercises that work for that athlete. And then when you have a major competition, you put those exercises back into the program, and the athlete gains confidence. So it's something I'm still using to this day. It's nice because diving is a smaller group. As far as athletes that have a good shot at qualifying for the Olympics, I've got 2 in the group I work with, and then the rest are Grand Prix level, junior level athletes. But it's nice because it's a smaller group, so you can really dial in what you're doing with them.
I love that because I think too that's something that I should probably be better at is you're talking about exercises that work for them and then revisiting those like things when you're dealing with taper athletes, and that's something I haven't thought of. I think that's a brilliant idea. But then even more so now, looking at it as you move forward, your primary evaluation was always jumping. Do you
Yeah.
see that with the field sport athlete moving more towards the some sort of sprint change of direction evaluation?
Yeah, you got to be. So we say what we do in the gym is specific, but like let's be honest, it is general. But there are some KPIs that we know that high level performers have that low level performers don't have, and so be very clear of what you're trying to address, and also be very clear of what are the limits of what you can address in the gym. So you take rugby sevens for instance. Sprinting speed is a very important quality. If you look at the GPS data, you will lose that in it because it's all boiled down to averages. But if you get a video of all the tries in the season, I've done this multiple times, speed might happen. So an athlete might hit 95% of their max speed, 1 or 2 athletes, 3 athletes a game. But when it does happen, it's in a critical moment in the game. So you can say, well, speed is a very important variable for rugby sevens. Well, what are other critical variables? Well, restarts. So the athletes have to have a high, single leg vertical jump to be able to regain that ball in possession. Fending. So there's certain things you can start to boil down, like vertical jump, acceleration, max velocity, repeat speed that you can start to track and see is your programming improving those variables. With diving, I use a series of different jumping tasks to guide my programming. So what I do with my divers is I'll do a counter move jump to compare to a squat jump, which gives me my eccentric utilization ratio. I do a force velocity profile, which is a series of jumps at different loads to give me an idea of whether or not this athlete needs to work on force or velocity. I do a counter move jump with arm swings, and I compare that to the counter move jump without arm swings. That gives me an idea of upper lower body coordination, and from there that can give me some insight and help me tease out what direction I need to take the training. And then I'll also look at asymmetries, right to left, because I've got a dual force plate set up that I run the athletes through, and that will give me an idea whether or not I do more bilateral or unilateral work with that athlete. And then I'll also do isometric mid-thigh pulls, which isn't as important, but it gives me an easy way to assess, you can call it max strength with those divers.
I love that, brother. I think that that's great, especially because In that sport, what's really weird is you're trying to push off of, other than platform, because that's a whole
Yeah.
other thing. That's just insane. But like the idea of pushing off a board that's already pushing you, and to look at how often they are really pushing with one side more than the other.
Yeah, and so what you'll find is those springboard divers, if they haven't done single leg work, they'll probably have a pretty big asymmetry. Cleans up really quickly though. If you put in some single leg work, or you put them in on the force plates and you get them to squat, do a bilateral movement, but give them some visual to look at, so they can see when they're pushing more one leg or the other leg. Like those asymmetries will clean up fairly quickly as long as there's not an injury that's driving them. It's just something that you got to address in the weight room, and you can clean it up. And I don't think of asymmetries. I've changed a little bit on them. I think that you have a strong leg, and you have a leg that has a lot of potential versus one leg's weak. So it's a subtly different way of thinking about it. But these are athletes that train full time. Both legs are strong. They have a real strong leg, and they have a strong leg that has the opportunity to be strong. If that makes sense.
100%. I mean, it's not like, well, they're one of the few sports that actually could have had some sort of a crazy impact that it would maybe make them uneven. But,
Yep.
knock wood, I mean, if they're training for the Olympics, you would hope that they haven't had a crash like that.
Yeah, well, a lot of them will at some point. If those falls from the 10 meters, you over rotate, you can't end up in the hospital. One of my girls actually is a high diver. So she jumps from 20 meters. So you think 10-meter platforms are crazy. The 20 meters is nuts when you see the videos of that. But it's a collision sport, diving, and physics. One of the things that I'm trying to address with those divers, especially the platform ones, is body mass, right? It's momentum. The more you weigh, the harder your collision with the water, and the more momentum you have when you hit the water. And if you're trying to prevent injuries, well, if you can be at a healthy weight, the potential of injuries drops.
Now, I got a selfish question since you do a lot of work with divers. How often are you dealing with head injuries?
Injuries, I had a neck injury. So I've been back with diving now for 3 years. And the only thing I've had is a neck injury, which, it can present as a head injury. Yeah. And, that's something that's, we've been able to, most common injuries I have is, I'd say, overuse knees, because they do a lot of jumping in the gym and they do a lot of jumping at the pool. So what I try to do in the gym is we're either doing jumping with load or jumping at less than body weight, not doing exactly what they're doing at the pool. So you're trying to stimulate, right, versus simulate what they're doing at the pool. So I'd say knees are probably the number one. Well, I know they are because I've got the stats. Other ones that I will get is some wrist stuff, especially the platforms, and especially with the younger divers. So when they move to the 10 meter, you got to be careful with the volumes. And so things like cleans, you also just got to make sure they have that mobility in the wrists, because if they don't, and you're jumping into cleans, and their wrists are getting pissed off in the weight room, and then they go dive and they're getting pissed off at the diving pool. It's a little bit of a recipe for disaster, but you can give athlete mobility in the wrist and strengthen the wrists so that they can clean. You just need to be aware to keep an eye on it.
No doubt. I thought it was funny. So in episode 23, I had Rhett Larson on, and we talk a lot about diving because obviously his time in China, he did a lot with that.
Mm-hmm.
And where he saw the most with knee issues was because of how many times they climbed the ladder.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Which is
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I actually haven't looked at that, but I could tell you ours go up the stairs quite a few times. Like, they can do 60 dives in a session, and then you add on dry land beforehand. Like it's a high volume sport, and it's a lot of collisions. But it's a great sport to work with. It's literally a speed power sport. Like the athletes are trying to jump high, which does have an impact on the springboard. there's a critical level you need to jump on the platform. They have to go from short to long and long to short really quickly. So those are all things we can clean up in the gym. And then the other thing too is then shoulders. They need to have good range to the shoulders and T-spine, and they need to be strong in the shoulders and T-spine. Not necessarily when they have a good entry, but when they have a bad entry, so that they can control it and save that entry.
Yeah, and I think too that's something that's a unique challenge and a benefit of the sport is that it's scored so differently. But
it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, at least like with the women I get to work with, they're very open to not just listening, but like constructively being part of the entire program. Because I don't know of many strength and conditioning coaches that are like, oh yeah, I know exactly, first of all, what those numbers mean in your dive. Second of all, like why there's a letter at the end and why some have 4 numbers and others have 6 numbers or whatever it might be. So like their input, at least for me, is arguably the most of any of the athletes that I get to work with.
And they're also hyper aware of their body, their movements, because it's a very movement based sport where they're very precise with what they have to do, and so they're great athletes to work with. You give them a cue and boom, they pick it up like that. And also the coaches have addressed a lot of the issues that we typically have to deal with our field sport athletes before we even see them in the weight room. They have mobility, they have a decent level of strength. You just need to be careful with the novel stimulus of the weight room when you first introduce them into the weight room. But they are great athletes to work with.
So now just kind of bringing it back full circle a little bit and talking about those 2 younger athletes who had the chronic issues and going back to more of a repetitive model. Many people would argue that the cause of these overuse injuries is the repetitive situations. But you found that those alleviate when you keep from the stimulus being novel consistently. Do you feel that this is something that we should be looking at a bit more when it comes to possibly bringing about a decrease in some of these problems that are chronic in nature?
Well, with the system I had with rugby, there was a gas pedal and a brake, which was that control test on the Monday, and I think that was part of why it worked with those 2 athletes. The other thing too is, training protects us from injury. Yeah, Gavitt's kind of getting raked over the coals right now if you read journal articles. But like, let's be honest, if you build up a tolerance to stuff if you do it. Now, where it becomes an issue is if the amount of what you're doing, your body's not prepared to do it. So the other thing with the Bondarchuk system is you're not taking things to max very often, right? It's usually at 70%, 80% of what you'd call a 1 RM if you're doing squats, for example. So it's not the intent is high all the time, but the load is not high. The absolute load on the athletes. So I think that's the other reason why it was able to protect those athletes from injury as well, because they were able to maintain their technique while they were doing the movements, and they had that small window of available resources that they could rely on, always available to them if they were slightly out of position and needed to save a lift or something along those lines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I love that. And I love the fact that it, again, is all based upon some sort of, are they improving and are they able to adapt to the stress?
Yeah, we need to gear our programs around the athletes' adaptations. Because too often I think we give the athletes a program, we assume they adapted to it, right? We should always have some sort of, I don't want to call it testing, but some sort of measurement in the athlete's training so we can see, I've given these exercises to this athlete because this is what I want them to improve on. And are those metrics actually improving or are they crashing? And if they're crashing, is it because, this is a novel movement because there's different types of reactions. And if it's something super new to that athlete, they could actually go down a little bit. before it swings back up? Or is it because you've just prescribed too much load and there's too much stress in other areas of their lives? So they don't have the resources to actually adapt to that program. But we need some form of measurement and to hold ourselves accountable, but also to, evaluate our programs and are they effective? Are we screwing up? It's easy to write a program and full of fancy exercise and give it to an athlete enjoys it, and we all assume that they have improved. But it's actually kind of exciting when an athlete doesn't improve, because then you got to ask yourself, all right, why are they not improving? Where do I need to go next? When we look at our exercise science books in university from our undergrads, you have that performance and time curve, right? And it flat lines. Then you see that little arrow where it shoots up again, and there's a little asterisk, steroids, right? Well, no, it's not steroids. What it is you can keep driving adaptation as long as you're holding things back from that athlete, and you have resources that you're going to and exercises you're going to later in that athlete's career. Just because you can do something, don't necessarily do it, because you might need it in an Olympic year. And if you've used all your bells and whistles and your tools and your tool belt, and that athlete started to plateau in that Olympic year, well, what do you do next? You're hooped. And so, you got to monitor that athlete. Are they improving? And don't use everything. Like, keep things back. Just because you can use bands when you jump, accommodating resistance. With a, first or second year university student who's still adapting to, squatting and doing their bench pulls as a rower, well, just keep doing that. Don't pull out fancy bells and whistles, right? Velocity-based training. Like, I think intent is really important. Don't get me wrong here, but pull it out when you need it, and give them different constraints when you need it. As I've said, just because you can, don't think critically. Like, do I need to?
Right, because at the end of the day, like, why or where did this random 4 weeks, like, this became like the gold standard, right? Where it's like you either train in 4 week blocks or a 3 week block with a break. And again, like, this is what I was talking about, like, is probably going to be a My Thoughts Monday rant for me. Like, I don't get where that came from.
Yeah, you want to hear a dumb thing I did is, when I was coaching track and field, like, I did the coaching certifications that you do in Canada, like your level 1, 2, 3s. And, you learn about general prep, specific prep, competitive period. And, there was a time, and this stays on people who listen to your podcast, don't mention outside your podcast, but I would literally sit there with my spreadsheets and write down, all right, today we're in September, we're starting our base training. Okay, April 31st, we're going to do 10 jumps from a short approach, 10 jumps from a medium approach, and you're going to do 11 jumps from, a long approach. Well, how the hell do you know that that's what the athlete needs to do then? And how do you know that, you should do a 4 week block here and a 3 week block here and a 2 week block here? You don't. And, it's just a simple way out.
And it's crazy though, but we all sit there, and no matter what, like, there's probably people that are listening to this right now that are probably either like, Jay's insane and Dana's insane, or they're like, wait a minute, where did 4 weeks come from?
Yeah. A lot of these things are path dependencies. We do them for reasons that no longer, are valid. It's like, I've got my computer in front of me. There's a keyboard staring at me. Well, the reason this keyboard is designed the way it is not because it makes sense. It's because so typewriters don't jam. Well, who uses a typewriter anymore? And who uses a typewriter that has a tendency to jam anymore? Well, no one does. But yet we still use the same keyboard.
1,000%. So I just think that, like with some other things, there are situations that occur that for whatever reason, who knows why, we're just like, well, man, that sounds right. Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Like, again, like, just piggybacking off what you were saying, like, with these women, like, if they're still getting better and you're still moving forward, why do you have to change anything? Like, if your training is so taxing on these people, and I get it, you do have to stress to elicit adaptation. Don't twist my words here, people. But like, if your training is to the point that you have to change that much when they go from the off season to the in season, I guess maybe working in college basketball, I'm a little jaded in this because we really don't have an off season. They're always practicing. So it's just like a constant build up always. But like, what do we need to change at such a dramatic level for other than like your own entertainment?
No, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. Another thing too is that if you're changing things all the time, you know, you're using more and more exercises, you're using more and more of your tools, you're going to run out of tools at some point. And so, you know, as I said, like variability, I'm not saying variability is important, I'm saying variability is extremely important. And you got to keep some of that variability back for when you actually need it.
Bingo, when you need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's very key.
I love it, Dana. I love it. Listen, man, let me get you out of here on this. Where can people find out more of what you're doing and keep up to date with what's going on up there?
Man, I'll be honest, I keep a fairly low profile. But, you know, if anyone wants to get in contact with me, you have my email. I am on Twitter. I've actually purposely deleted all my social media. I asked myself, you know, what is adding value to my life? And actually, Twitter does add some value to my life because I get good journal article recommendations. So, you know, I'm on Twitter. I apologize. I'll post pictures of my dogs and hunting and stuff like that. But you can always get a hold of me on email, and feel free to share it. Twitter, and you know, I always love talking about training and sharing ideas with people. And I'm sure you talk to Corey, like you know, we bounce ideas back and forth all the time. So the more people to bounce ideas off of, the better.
Awesome, brother. Truly appreciate your time, Dana. This is great. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll be in touch real soon, brother.
Yeah, no problem. Have a great one.
You too, man. Cheers.
Awesome. Bye.
And a huge thanks to Dana Agar-Newman for spending the time with us today. Guys, just some open, honest, candid sharing and really some different ideas, you know, and thinking about it in this way. If it ain't broke, why fix it, right? And Dana seems to be having some great success with the athletes he gets to work with when it comes to evaluating and monitoring and moving them forward, but not necessarily just flipping the exercises to flip the exercises. I can't thank Dana enough for spending the time with us today and being so open, honest, and candid with his sharing. I think this is sensational stuff. And Dana, keep up the great work, man. I love what you're doing. I love these ideas and these principles that you're practicing out there. This is sensational stuff. And as always, guys, if you did enjoy the talk, please share it through the social media outlet of your choice, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be. As always, we are just trying to get the best information out there to all the great coaches that we can. And as always, guys, thank you for everything that you do for us here at Central Virginia Sport Performance. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.